Welcome to RSG Insider, where we talk about issues facing local governments. My name is Tara Matthews, and I'm a principal at RSG. And I'm here today with Sara Court, who's very versed in the topic of rent stabilization. And today we're going to be discussing what that means and how that affects local communities. Sara, maybe you can just take a brief moment here to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Sara Court. I am an associate at RSG, and my background, I'm experienced in working in local government to help to implement and roll out a rent stabilization program. And as an RSG associate, I also assist with working in several jurisdictions across California to help implement these programs.
And it's also true that you actually worked at a city implementing their rent stabilization ordinance. Is that true?
Yes.
So very, very experienced. So we're starting to hear a lot this term rent stabilization. It keeps kind of popping up. What does it mean? Can you describe a little bit more about it?
Yeah, definitely. So in our work at RSG, we kind of noticed that the term rent stabilization or the topic really started to gain traction when the state took notice of all of the affordability issues in housing and displacement issues happening at the state. So the state adopted AB 1482 or the Tenant Protection Act, which implemented statewide rent stabilization measures and eviction protection measures for California renters. And then more recently, with the lifting of some COVID-19 related eviction moratoriums, that really continued to shine a light on all of the affordability issues that renters were facing in California. And local jurisdictions have really taken more of an interest in going beyond what was offered by state law, implementing some more stringent measures in their communities to further protect tenants from displacement and rising rents in their jurisdiction. So here at RSG, we kind of help cities who are interested in adopting these policies to kind of research best practices, really get the community involved in these conversations, help with some community outreach and education, and really, also with the day-to-day administration and getting these programs off the ground.
So can you provide an overview of what rent stabilizations are and how they function in the context of housing policy?
Yeah, definitely. So, rent stabilization measures at the highest level, they try to restrict increases in rent above a certain designated allowable amount. And those can vary by jurisdiction, but they're typically tied to, some kind of measure of inflation, like the change in the consumer price index. And oftentimes we see these paired with just cause eviction protections, which try to, limit reasons for evictions to prevent arbitrary evictions in the community. So that being said, we do see them looking very different in different jurisdictions. So some jurisdictions, they decide they only want that eviction piece. They don't want more strict rent limits, or maybe they only want their policy to apply to mobile home parks in their community. Or maybe they want, it to cover all rental units and some, and adding additional protections to as it relates to Ellis Act or getting out of the rental market or having more regulations over tenant buyout agreements. So they really can vary, from minimal interaction or regulations to a high level of regulations on rental units. And there really is no one size fits all approach. So we help to kind of identify the needs in the community that we're working with and help them tailor the policy to the issues that they hope to address.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of factors to consider and a lot of moving pieces for implementing these. So, how, with that in mind, how does jurisdiction approach implementing a policy like this? What factors are considered?
Yeah, we see various ways that these can be implemented in a local jurisdiction. Those being they can be city council approved, so an initiative that's brought forward by the council and approved by the council. Another way is the community bringing forward a proposed policy and it being more of a ballot initiative that gets voted on in a local election. So for city council approved initiatives, we work with communities to really do some research on best practices, engage the community, and get community buy in. And for those ballot proposals, we can assist with doing some impact studies to make sure that the city and the community knows the impact that would come with the proposed initiative.
That's really interesting. It sounds like this could be a very hot topic in a jurisdiction, whether or not it's brought forward by the city council or through a ballot initiative. Are there specific factors that a city should consider when they're thinking about implementing these policies?
Yeah, definitely. There are several factors. I'll talk about a few here today, but first is definitely just understanding the community priorities. So, really engaging with the community, hearing what the community feels like is the biggest priority to address in terms of housing affordability, and analyzing the housing challenges in your community. Every community is different. Taking a look at the types of rental properties in your community. How many rental properties are there? And how are tenants, what are the demographic of tenants, and how are they, struggling with certain rent increases or issues related to displacement. So doing a really thorough analysis of the community and the housing needs within your community is important as a good basis for developing these policies. And then second, I would say really, considering staffing needs in your community. Um, Staffing needs and budget are really, we see, related to the complexity of the policy that's being brought forward and the number of rental units in a particular jurisdiction. And also, how the city plans to enforce the policy bringing brought forward, how many services are offered, such as additional services like mediation or, different ways to dispute tenant and landlord issues. So, and lastly, in terms of legal compliance, I would just recommend that you really involve legal counsel or your city attorney from the beginning in the development of these policies. So they're you're making sure the policy is legally sound, and each step of implementation, you're getting that guidance.
It sounds like there's a lot of things to consider. You have the need for the policy in the community. If you determine that there is a need, making sure that it's set up to be legally sound and have all these various processes in place while still balancing the interests of all the parties involved. So, once a jurisdiction does that and a policy is adopted, how do they ensure that those local regulations are adhered to?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge factor. You spend all this time getting a policy in place, and now you have to make sure that people are following this law that you adopted. So, we really see the most common and the most essential framework of enforcement in local jurisdictions is a rental registry. So, these are very common in rent stabilization programs. A rental registry is just kind of a centralized database where landlords are required to come in and register their property on an annual basis, tell the city about their tenancies, how much rent is being charged, if an eviction takes place, the reason for the eviction, maybe providing all the notices that they serve to tenants. And that really serves as a good tool to provide transparency into the rental market, and to kind of hold property owners accountable for the local law. And it can also be used as a place where a fee is collected if there's an annual program fee. So RSG has, assisted with the development and, building out a rental registry and assisting with that rollout in the community as well, which is a big piece of that enforcement.
Yeah, that sounds like it could be a little bit of a complex issue. I mean, you're mentioning the rolling out of a rental registry. I imagine it may be a little bit challenging to basically incentivize and convince property owners to provide all of that type of information that you were mentioning. Can you talk just a little bit more about your experience in trying to implement a rental registry and to get compliance with the rental registry process?
Yeah, definitely. As with any new law, regulation, anything that's kind of implementing new regulations, there is that initial pushback. I think that the biggest, thing that you can do to, enforce or roll out a rental registry would just really be focusing on that education and community outreach. Educating property owners to make sure that they understand their responsibility to register, timelines by which they are required to register. Creating a lot of really great, like helpful informational materials is important, and really dedicating a lot of staff resources during that time to just kind of be there to answer questions over the phone, email, in person, sitting down and walking people through it, is really appreciated when something new like this is implemented. And also, taking a little bit of a stronger approach, you can always implement measures into an ordinance that encourages compliance. There are rent stabilization ordinances that say, if you fail to register, you can't increase rent or you can't evict a tenant. So that usually helps to increase compliance for rental registration as well.
This is a lot of work, it sounds like. I mean, you've mentioned implementing rental registry process, you've mentioned petitions and hearings and being available to just answer questions. How are these types of programs funded?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it all comes back to funding. So, simply put, typically there is just an annual fee that's put in place to cover the cost to administer the program. That annual fee is usually paid by the property owner, or sometimes it can be split between the property owner and the tenant since they're kind of both benefiting. And typically, a local jurisdiction will conduct a fee study to determine an appropriate fee that hopefully will cover all of the costs to administer the program. So, the goal is kind of to be cost neutral and have all of those fees cover the costs to administer. But as we just mentioned, compliance can be tricky here. So, there oftentimes might be a shortfall or other funding sources needed to cover costs to administer. But overall, yeah, like I would say, just a combination of an annual program fee and then other sources to help address shortfalls like a city's general fund or other funds that they might have for housing related activities.
Sarah, this has been really insightful. If you had three things that you wanted the audience today walk away with knowing, what are those things?
Yeah, definitely. I think just to kind of reiterate, first would be just really conducting that thorough evaluation of market conditions prior to the implementation of the ordinance. We see that being a real key to success for jurisdictions. Taking that little bit of time to really understand the layout of their community and the challenges that are being faced is important. Which kind of leads to that second point of engaging with stakeholders and community members early on in the process. So, having those surveys, town hall meetings, subcommittees, people who are really invested in, getting this policy right, because they do affect a lot of tenants and property owners in the city. And then lastly, I would just say, making sure that you have adequate resources in place, having those administrative structures kind of planned out ahead of time really helps with that implementation process. So you're not kind of constantly playing catch up and trying to get staffed up to implement the policy effectively. But yeah, I think keeping those things in mind are really important when implementing these programs, and we see those as being really keys to success in the communities that adopt these policies.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for tuning in today to hear us talk about rent stabilization.